The royal dressing chamber of House Vale was too quiet for a room preparing a child for history. Princess Lyra Vale sat on a low ceremonial stool, while three attendants fastened the silver-blue layers of her summit robe around her small shoulders. The fabric was soft, but the collar was stiff, and every time Lyra tried to turn her head, it pressed against her throat like a rule she had not agreed to obey. She was 6 by human measure, though the Varathi court never used human measures when speaking of her. To them, she was the future of the Dominion, the last bright seed of a wounded royal line, the child who would one day inherit a throne built from star maps, old victories, and grief. To Lyra, she was simply tired. The palace had woken her before dawn. They had brushed her pale silver hair until it shone like moon thread, painted a tiny royal mark beneath each eye, and told her at least 12 times that today she must be brave. Brave in court language meant still. Brave meant quiet. Brave meant not asking the wrong question when adults looked sad. Matron Ussura stood behind her, inspecting the final clasp with strict tenderness. She had raised Lyra since infancy and loved her with the careful discipline of someone afraid love might make the child weak. "Hold your chin higher, little star," Ussura said. "The cameras will see you from below during the future witness ceremony." Lyra lifted her chin, then frowned at her reflection in the polished mirror. The child looking back at her seemed too formal, too polished, too much like a doll placed in a shrine. "Will the humans see me too?" she asked. The room changed slightly. No one gasped. No one scolded her, but the attendant's hand slowed and Ussura's expression tightened in the mirror. "Yes," the matron said. "The humans will be present. That is why your posture matters." Lyra studied her own golden eyes, large and serious beneath the ceremonial marks. "Do they really look like monsters?" One of the younger attendants dropped a clasp. It struck the marble floor with a bright sound. Ussura turned slowly, and the attendant bent at once to retrieve it. "Humans do not always look like what they are," Ussura said. "That is why they are dangerous." Lyra turned despite the collar pressing her throat. "But if they are dangerous, why are we making peace with them?" The question was simple, and because it was simple, it became difficult. Ussura knelt in front of her, taking both of Lyra's small hands between her own. "Because wars end, child. Sometimes they end with victory. Sometimes they end because both sides have bled enough to remember they are mortal." "Did we bleed enough?" Lyra asked. Ussura's eyes softened, then hardened again. "Your mother did." That answer made Lyra go quiet. She knew the story the way all Varathi children knew it, though everyone told it more gently when she was in the room. Years ago, during the border war, a royal evacuation convoy had been destroyed near the Ashen Gate. Her aunt, Lady Varine, had died there. So had many guards, pilots, and servants whose names were spoken once every year during the morning bells. The court said humans had caused the attack. The court said humans came from a restless species that smiled with teeth and turned every frontier into a battlefield. The court said Lyra had survived only because loyal Varathi had pulled her from the wreckage before the human fire reached her. Lyra did not remember it clearly. Sometimes she dreamed of red lights and smoke. Sometimes she dreamed of metal screaming. Sometimes, in the deepest part of the dream, there was a voice she could never place, calm and low, telling her to breathe. But when she woke and asked about it, Ussura always said memory could become confused after trauma. "You were very small," the matron would tell her. "The mind protects itself by making shadows." Lyra believed her because children believed the adults who held them when they cried. Still, there were nights when the voice in the dream did not feel like a shadow. It felt like a hand stretched through fire. The chamber doors opened, and Queen Merith Vale entered without announcement because no one announced the sun inside its own sky. Every attendant bowed. Ussura stood and lowered her head. Lyra slipped off the stool before anyone could stop her and ran across the chamber, ceremonial robe whispering around her ankles. The queen caught her gently, though one of the royal guards shifted as if even a child's sudden movement near the sovereign was a thing to be measured. Merith was tall, elegant, and very still, with silver-blue skin marked by faint luminous patterns beneath the eyes, the old sign of the royal bloodline. Her crown was not large, but it seemed heavy anyway. Lyra pressed her face against her mother's robes and breathed in the scent of rainwood and cold metal. "You look like a star today," Marith said softly. "A very uncomfortable star," Lyra muttered. The queen's mouth curved barely. "Most official stars are." For one small moment the room became warmer. Then Lyra looked up. "Mother, are humans evil?" The warmth did not vanish, but it withdrew behind something older. Queen Marith's hand stilled against her daughter's hair. Usura's face tightened again. The attendants did not move. "Why do you ask?" the queen said. "Because today I have to sit near them. And everyone says I must not be afraid, but everyone also says I must stay away from them. That is confusing." Marith lowered herself so she was eye level with her daughter. This close, Lyra could see the tiredness beneath the royal paint. "Humans have done terrible things," the queen said. "So have we," Lyra replied, because she was a child and truth still came out of her before politics could stop it. Usura inhaled sharply. Marith did not rebuke her. She only closed her eyes for a moment, as if the sentence had touched an injury no doctor could reach. "Yes," the queen said at last. "So have we." Lyra waited, sensing there was more. The queen opened her eyes again. "Peace is not the same as trust, little star. Today is not about forgetting what happened. It is about preventing more children from growing up with mourning bells in their houses." That answer made more sense, but not enough. "If humans only destroy things," Lyra asked, "why did they bring doctors with their delegation?" This time even Marith had no ready answer. The question hung in the dressing chamber like a forbidden bird. Usura stepped in gently, saving the queen from silence. "Because even dangerous species understand appearances." Lyra looked unconvinced. "Do monsters bring doctors for appearances?" "Some do," Usura said. "The worst ones learn how to seem kind." Marith rose then, and the queen returned fully to her face. "Enough for now. The shuttle leaves soon." She touched Lyra's cheek with 2 fingers and her voice softened again. "You do not need to hate today. You only need to remember caution." Lyra nodded, though she did not fully understand the difference. Marith turned toward the door, then stopped as if a thought had caught her from behind. When she looked back, her expression was not queenly anymore. It was afraid. "Lyra," she said, "listen carefully." The child straightened. Usura did too. The queen's voice dropped low enough that only those nearest could hear. "The Meridian Arc will be crowded. There will be diplomats, guards, cameras, and strangers from many worlds. You will stay close to Matron Usura. You will not wander. And no matter what happens today, no matter who calls your name or offers help, you must not go near a human." Lyra looked into her mother's eyes and saw something deeper than anger there. Pain, yes. Fear, certainly. Love most of all. So she nodded like a good royal child and said the words everyone wanted from her. "I understand." But as the attendants led her toward the waiting shuttle, the old dream stirred again somewhere beneath her ribs. Red lights, smoke, screaming metal, and that impossible calm voice from the fire, telling her to take small steps and keep breathing. The Meridian Arc did not belong to any empire, which was why every empire hated using it. It floated in neutral space beside a blue-white star, its outer rings turning slowly around a central diplomatic core built from glass, silver alloy, and old treaties. From a distance it looked peaceful, almost beautiful, but Sergeant Elias Morrow had been on enough stations to know beauty was often where people hid the most weapons. The Ark had no visible cannons, no warship escorts, and no heavy military docking arms, but it had blast shutters behind every ceremonial window, pressure seals under every polished floor, and enough hidden security sensors to make his wrist scanner itch. He stepped out of the human delegation shuttle behind Ambassador Karina Holt, wearing a dark formal uniform that still had rescue armor hidden beneath the fabric panels. His posture was straight, his face calm, and his eyes were already moving. Doorways, balconies, guard rotations, sight lines, crowd flow. He was not expecting trouble because expecting trouble made people stupid. He was simply accepting that trouble often arrived when everyone had dressed nicely and promised it would not. Behind him, Milo Finch struggled down the ramp with a diplomatic supply case nearly as wide as his body. Milo was officially the human delegation's quartermaster, which meant he managed ceremonial gifts, medical reserves, translator batteries, emergency nutrition, legal documents, and whatever strange object somebody had forgotten until 30 seconds before it became essential. Unofficially, he was the man everyone laughed at until they needed tape that worked in vacuum or candy that calmed a panicking child. I still say peace talks should come with chairs designed by people who have spines, Milo muttered, adjusting the strap across his shoulder. Every alien summit chair looks like it was designed to punish honesty. Elias glanced at him. You have not sat down yet. I am preparing emotionally. Ambassador Holt did not turn around, but Elias saw her shoulders move with a suppressed laugh. Good. A little humor before a room full of historical grief was not weakness. Sometimes it was oxygen. The Verathi delegation arrived through the opposite docking gate in a flowing line of silver-blue robes, dark ceremonial armor, and controlled silence. Elias watched them without staring. Queen Merith Vale stood at the center, tall and luminous under the station lights, every inch a monarch trained to bleed privately and rule publicly. Beside her walked the child, Princess Lyra, small, formal, too still. Her robes were beautiful, but the collar was too stiff, and she held her hands together so tightly that the small knuckles had gone pale beneath the ceremonial markings. Matron Ussera walked close behind her, watchful as a locked door. Elias felt something stir at the edge of memory when he saw the princess's face, but it did not take shape. He had carried too many children out of smoke. Too many faces had blurred into the same urgent category. Alive, keep alive. Move, breathe. Do not look at the bodies. He pushed the old echo down and returned to the present. The first greeting between the delegations was polite enough to hurt. Ambassador Holt bowed with human restraint. Queen Merith inclined her head with royal precision. Words were exchanged through translator fields, all careful edges and formal temperature. Elias stayed behind the ambassador's right shoulder. Milo stayed behind Elias, whispering, "Nobody has thrown anything yet, promising start." Elias murmured, "Milo, right." Silent optimism. Across the reception platform, Lyra's eyes flicked once toward the humans and then away quickly, like looking too long might break a rule. Elias noticed that. He also noticed how one Verathi admiral, tall and severe in dark command armor, watched the child more than he watched the human ambassador. Admiral Rayler Dask. Elias knew the file. War hero, hardliner, public supporter of peace only because opposing the queen openly would make him look reckless. Dangerous kind of man. Not because he was loud, but because he was patient. The delegations were separated for final preparations before the ceremony. The humans were taken to a waiting salon overlooking the Ark's observation gardens, where artificial trees shimmered with pale leaves and a narrow stream ran beneath a transparent floor. Elias should have stayed with the ambassador, but one of the emergency lights near the garden entrance began flickering in an uneven pattern that tugged at his attention. Not decorative flicker, power fluctuation. Maybe nothing. Maybe a camera loop trying to hide a blind spot. He crossed to it, opened the small wall panel with permission from an Arc technician, and began checking the connector. Milo appeared beside him with a sigh. "We have been on station 8 minutes and you are already doing maintenance." Elias kept working. Light was wrong. Of course it was. Heaven forbid a bulb have privacy. That was when Elias noticed the child standing at the edge of the garden path. Princess Lyra had slipped away from the Verathi preparation corridor, or perhaps simply walked 2 turns too far while no one expected a royal child to move without authorization. She froze when she saw him. Her eyes widened. Her small hands tightened in the folds of her robe. Elias did not move toward her. He slowly lowered the repair tool, set it on the floor, and turned his palms outward where she could see them. Then he crouched, not kneeling like a servant and not bowing like a diplomat, just making himself smaller. "You don't have to come closer," he said gently. "I'm only fixing the light." Lyra stared at him as if the sentence had arrived in a language deeper than translation. You are human. Yes, humans break things. Milo, still half behind the open panel, whispered, in our defense, we also fix the things other people broke first. Elias gave him one look. Milo lifted both hands. Quietly fixing democracy now. Lyra blinked at him, confused enough that fear briefly loosened its grip. Elias kept his attention soft. Some humans break things, some fix lights. Some do both, depending on the day. Lyra looked at the flickering panel. Why are you fixing it? Because dark corners make frightened people more frightened. The answer seemed to surprise her. She looked back toward the corridor where distant voices were growing closer. I am not supposed to talk to you. Then you don't have to. You are talking to me. Only because you asked questions. She considered that with grave seriousness. You did not walk closer. Elias shook his head. You looked scared. Walking closer would make that worse. Something in her expression changed, too small for most adults to catch. She was not reassured, not fully, but she was thinking. That mattered. Then Matron Usura appeared at the far archway, her face tightening with alarm. Princess. Lyra flinched at the sharpness of the voice. Elias immediately looked down at the floor, giving the matron no reason to think he had been holding the child with his gaze. Usura crossed the garden quickly and placed a protective hand on Lyra's shoulder. Come away. Lyra obeyed, but before she turned, she looked once more at Elias. Her voice was barely above a whisper. The light is better now. Elias glanced at the panel. The flicker had stopped. So it is. Milo waited until the Verathi were gone before breathing out. Well, that was either a diplomatic breakthrough or the first paragraph in our court-martial. Elias closed the panel slowly, but his eyes stayed on the corridor where the princess had vanished. She's terrified of us. Milo's humor faded just a little. A lot of them are. Elias picked up the tool and stood. Fear that rehearsed usually has a teacher. Somewhere deeper in the arc, ceremony bells began to sound, calling both delegations toward the hall where peace was supposed to begin. The ceremony hall of the Meridian Arc had been designed by 3 neutral species, which meant it was beautiful, balanced, and deeply uncomfortable to everyone using it. The ceiling rose in a wide silver dome filled with slow-moving star projections. The floor was polished black stone that reflected every robe, every weapon, every careful expression. At the center stood 2 raised platforms facing each other across a narrow line of white light, one marked for the Verathi Dominion and one marked for the human delegation. Between them was an empty circular space where the treaty would be spoken, recorded, witnessed, and judged by millions watching through secure broadcast channels across both civilizations. Princess Lyra sat beside Queen Marith on a smaller ceremonial seat, her feet not quite touching the floor, her hands folded exactly the way Usura had taught her. From the outside, she looked perfect. Inside, she felt like everyone's eyes were pressing against her skin. The future witness ceremony was supposed to prove that the next royal generation accepted the peace. Usura had explained it many times. If the heir was present, no war faction could later claim the treaty had been signed in secret or forced by cowardice. Lyra understood that part. What she did not understand was why proving peace required a child to sit under cameras while adults looked at each other as if they were deciding whether old wounds deserved to keep bleeding. Across the hall, Sergeant Elias Morrow stood behind Ambassador Karina Holt with Milo Finch at his side. Elias was not looking at the decorations. He was watching movement. Verathi royal guards stood along the eastern wall in silver armor. Human security remained near the western entrance, hands visible, weapons sealed under diplomatic lock. Ark peacekeepers occupied the upper balconies in white uniforms. In theory, that balance made violence almost impossible. In practice, Elias had never trusted any security plan that required everyone to remain reasonable. He noticed the first irregularity before the opening oath began. A Verathi guard near the northern service arch shifted posts 3 minutes early. Not much, not enough to challenge. Then one of the arc cameras above the left gallery angled down by 2 degrees, creating a blind wedge behind a row of ceremonial columns. Again, not enough. Small things became dangerous only when they started agreeing with one another. Milo leaned close and whispered, "Your face has gone all stormy." Elias kept his eyes forward. "Guard rotation is wrong. Wrong like embarrassing paperwork, wrong or wrong like I should regret not bringing the bigger emergency bag." "You brought the bigger emergency bag." Milo patted the bulky case at his feet. "Correct. I regret nothing." The ceremony began with Queen Marith stepping forward. Her voice carried through the translation field, calm and clear. "The Varathi Dominion comes to this station carrying memory, loss, and the burden of command. We do not stand here because history is simple. We stand here because the future cannot be built only from graves." A murmur passed through the Varathi side, soft but intense. Lyra looked up at her mother, hearing the grief beneath the formal words. Then Ambassador Holt stepped forward from the human platform. "Humanity comes carrying our dead as well," she said. "But we also come carrying a responsibility to the living. If peace is possible, then pride cannot be the reason we refuse it." Lyra looked at the human woman carefully. She did not sound like a monster. She sounded tired. That confused Lyra more than hatred would have. Hatred was easy to recognize. Tiredness was harder because adults on both sides wore it the same way. Admiral Rayler Dask stood among the Varathi military witnesses, his dark armor polished to a mirror finish. He listened with perfect discipline, but his eyes kept moving to Lyra. Not often, not obviously, just enough that Elias noticed. The Admiral's presence had already made the human security briefings uncomfortable. He was popular among veterans, powerful among border fleets, and publicly loyal to Queen Marith in the exact way ambitious men were loyal when everyone was watching. Elias shifted his gaze to the Admiral's escort. 6 officers. One too many compared to the diplomatic manifest. He tapped 2 fingers lightly against his own wrist, sending a silent note to human security. "Check Varathi escort count. Do not escalate." The reply pulsed once. "Acknowledged." Milo watched the tiny motion and muttered, "I hate when your fingers start talking." Elias replied, then stopped noticing. "Impossible. Your paranoia is very expressive." Matron Usura leaned close to Lyra as the second oath began. "Sit still," she whispered gently. "The witness cameras are focused." Lyra forced her shoulders straighter. On the human side she saw Elias again. He was not smiling. He was not staring at her either. He was looking at doors, guards, lights, and shadows. For some reason, that made her remember the garden. "You don't have to come closer. I'm only fixing the light." She looked quickly away before Usura noticed. A child raised on warnings could still know the difference between a person who reached and a person who waited. That thought frightened her, because it was not one she was supposed to have. The treaty recorder rose from the center floor, a transparent column filled with blue light. Both leaders placed their hands near it, not touching, not yet. The Ark's chief arbiter spoke from the upper dais. "Let the royal heir be witnessed. Let the child of tomorrow stand within the record of peace." Usura helped Lyra step down from the small seat. The hall became impossibly quiet. Lyra walked 3 small steps forward, exactly as rehearsed, and stood beside her mother. Across from her, Ambassador Holt bowed her head slightly. The human did not look frightening. Elias behind her looked tense. That was when the lights flickered once. It was so brief most of the hall did not react. Elias did. His eyes snapped to the northern service arch, where the early guard rotation had happened. The Varathi Admiral's escort shifted at almost the same moment. Queen Marith was still facing the treaty recorder, unaware. Lyra felt the air change before she understood why. Somewhere above the ceremony dome, a security camera went dark. The security camera above the ceremony dome went dark, and for half a second nothing happened. That was the worst part. The hall remained beautiful. The treaty recorder still glowed blue. Queen Marith's hand still hovered near the column. Ambassador Holt still stood across from her, poised and careful, while Princess Lyra stood between 2 histories that had not yet decided whether to forgive each other. Elias Morrow felt the silence collapse before the sound arrived. His hand moved toward the diplomatic lock on his sidearm, but he did not draw. Not yet. Drawing first in a room like this could become the first sentence of the next war. Then the upper gallery exploded inward. Not a fireball, not some wild dramatic blast, but a hard directional charge that tore through the balcony rail and threw white-armored Ark peacekeepers into the lower steps. The dome's star projection shattered into static. The blue treaty light flickered red. Screams broke from both sides of the hall as smoke spilled down from the gallery in thick rolling sheets. "Down!" Elias shouted, and this time he did draw, but he kept the weapon low, angled toward the floor until he knew what had attacked them. Human security moved around Ambassador Holt, forming a tight protective wedge. Verathi royal guards surged toward Queen Marith, silver armor flashing under emergency lights. The first shots came from the eastern balcony, but the signal markers on the muzzle flashes were human-coded. Elias saw them and felt his stomach drop. Too obvious, too clean, too perfectly placed for every Verathi camera still functioning to read. "False markers," he snapped into the human security channel. "Do not return fire unless you have visual confirmation." Ambassador Holt turned sharply. "Elias, they want us shooting back into smoke," he said. "That is the trap." Milo Finch hit the floor beside the supply case and dragged it under one arm like a man rescuing a beloved pet. "For the record, I hate being right about the bigger emergency bag." Across the hall, Lyra froze. The first explosion had knocked sound out of the world and then returned it all at once, too loud and broken to understand. Her mother was there one moment, only a few steps away. Then guards rushed between them, robes snapped in the smoke, someone crashed into the treaty recorder, and the blue light burst into sparks. A hand grabbed Lyra's shoulder from behind and spun her sideways. She cried out, not loudly, more from surprise than pain. Matron Usura reached for her. "Princess!" Another blast struck the floor near the Verathi platform. The shock threw Usura down hard, and Lyra saw her matron's head strike the lower step. "Usura!" she screamed. She tried to run to her, but a royal guard caught her wrist and pulled her toward the northern service arch. "This way, little star," he said. "Your mother ordered evacuation." At first, Lyra obeyed because the armor was silver, and silver armor meant palace safety. Then his grip tightened until it hurt. Lyra looked up through smoke and saw his helmet crest. The crescent was there, but it was wrong, reversed, like a reflection pretending to be real. Usura pushed herself onto one elbow, blood darkening the edge of her ceremonial veil. Her eyes found the guard and widened with horror. "Lyra, no," she cried, "not him. He is not royal guard." The fake guard's fingers closed harder around Lyra's wrist. His voice stayed gentle, which made it worse. "Do not listen." "She is confused." Lyra pulled back. "You're hurting me." "Move," he said, and now the softness was gone. He dragged her toward the side corridor as two more figures in silver armor emerged from the smoke to cover the path. Behind them, real Verathi guards were fighting shapes in the gallery, unable to see who had the princess. Queen Marith's voice cut through the chaos somewhere to Lyra's left, raw for the first time in public. "Lyra!" The child twisted toward her mother, but bodies surged between them. A shot struck the floor near Lyra's feet, spraying hot fragments across her robe. She stumbled. The fake guard yanked her upright. "Quiet!" Elias saw the reversed crest at the same moment Usura shouted. Everything narrowed. The child was being moved toward the blind wedge near the service arch, exactly where the camera had dropped. He could not sprint at her. If a human charged a Verathi princess during an attack marked with human signals, the lie would be complete before he crossed half the hall. So he did the only thing that had a chance of not making the world worse. He lowered his weapon, slid it across the floor toward Milo, and stepped into the smoke with both hands open. "Elias, that is a terrible plan," Milo hissed, grabbing the weapon. "Noted," Elias said. "Try to look harmless. I am carrying 12 kilos of emergency supplies and fear. This is my harmless face." The fake guard saw Elias and lifted his sidearm toward him, using Lyra as a shield without quite making it obvious. Elias stopped at once and dropped to one knee. The movement was slow, deliberate, and visible to every frightened eye that might be watching. He did not reach for the child. He did not order her. He did not say her name like he owned it. He only looked at her through the smoke, past the trembling barrel of the fake guard's weapon and made his voice steady enough to stand on. "Princess," he said, "look at me." Lyra's breath caught. The hall disappeared for one strange heartbeat. Smoke, red light, metal screaming. The old dream opened under her feet. Elias kept one hand raised and one hand flat against the floor. "Small steps, keep breathing, I've got you." Lyra went still. Those words were impossible. She knew them from somewhere deeper than memory, from heat and darkness and a silver blanket wrapped tight around her shaking body. The fake guard pulled her again. "Move." Elias did not come closer. His eyes stayed on hers. "Your choice," he said softly, "but choose now." Lyra made the choice before her mind could explain it. Her mother's warning screamed inside her, bright and terrified, but the fake guard's hand was crushing her wrist. His reversed crest flashed wrong in the smoke, and the human kneeling in front of her was the only adult in the hall who was not pulling, shouting, or claiming her. Elias did not reach. He waited. That was what broke the fear open. Lyra twisted hard, smaller and quicker than the guard expected, slipping one hand free from the loose ceremonial sleeve. The fake guard cursed and grabbed for her again, but she dropped low the way Usura had once taught her during palace evacuation drills and ran. Not toward the silver armor, not toward the shouting nobles, not even toward the blurred shape of her mother beyond the chaos. She ran straight through the smoke toward the human. A sound went through the hall when they saw it, not one voice but many, a wave of disbelief sharper than the alarms. The royal child of the Varathi dominion, the little heir who had been raised beneath morning bells and warnings, crossed the broken treaty floor and threw herself against Sergeant Elias Morrow. Elias caught her only because she chose him. The instant she reached him, he wrapped one arm around her shoulders and turned his body between her and the fake guard's weapon. The shot came a heartbeat later. It struck the polished floor beside Elias and burst into white sparks. Lyra screamed against his uniform. Elias pushed her down behind the fallen treaty recorder and covered her head with his forearm as a second shot punched through the smoke above them. "Milo," Elias called. "Left side." Milo Finch, who had been trying very hard to look like a harmless supply clerk and failing, because he was now holding Elias' locked sidearm in both hands, fired one careful stun round into the fake guard's shoulder. The guard stumbled but did not fall. "I would like the record to show I am not trained for dramatic rescues," Milo shouted, ducking behind a cracked column. "You're doing fine," Elias called back. "That is not the same as doing well." Elias almost laughed, but Lyra was shaking too hard against him. He lowered his voice at once. "Princess, listen to me. Eyes on the floor light. Breathe with it. In, out, small steps." "Still with me?" Lyra nodded against his chest, too frightened to speak. "Good, you ran well." The fake guards pushed forward through the smoke, no longer pretending to be royal security. One fired toward the human position while another reached for Lyra again, shouting into a hidden calm. "Asset is loose. Human interference. Move to recovery." That word changed Elias' face. Asset, not child, not princess. Asset. He shifted Lyra behind the broken treaty recorder and pressed a small emergency breathing filter from Milo's open bag into her hands. "Put this over your mouth and stay low." "Are you taking me to the humans?" she whispered. Her voice was tiny under the alarms. Elias looked at her fully so she could see there was no trick in his answer. "No, I'm taking you to your mother." That mattered more than comfort. Lyra's fingers closed around the filter. Behind Elias, Milo slid across the floor on one knee, dragging the supply case with him while muttering, "Emergency filters, heat patches, translator beads, shock blanket, snack bars, diplomatic apology cards, and one stuffed rabbit. Please let the rabbit not be legally necessary." He shoved a second filter toward Lyra and then tossed a roll of seal tape to Elias. "Also, the fake guards have better armor than my self-esteem." Elias caught the tape, ripped a strip free with his teeth, and slapped it across the treaty recorder's cracked power core before it could burst into another spray of sparks. "Useful bag. I have been saying that for years." Across the hall, Queen Marith saw her daughter crouched behind neutral cover with a human soldier shielding her. For one terrible moment, the queen's face filled with the exact horror every enemy of peace wanted from her. Her child was in human arms. Her child had run there willingly. Around Marith, loyal guards tried to form a route, but the attackers were cutting the hall into pieces with smoke charges and false signal bursts. Admiral Rayler's voice rose over the Verathi command channel, loud enough for half the hall to hear. "The humans have the princess. All units secure the air." Elias heard it and understood the trap tightening. If he moved Lyra toward the human side, Rayler would call it abduction. If he stayed in place, the attackers would close in. If he surrendered her to the wrong silver armor, she would disappear into the blind corridor. He turned to the nearest real Verathi guard, a wounded young officer pinned behind a fallen light column. "You," Elias shouted. "Name and oath mark." The guard blinked through blood and smoke. "Captain Surin, third shield of the inner house. Can you reach your queen?" "Not through that fire line." Elias pointed to Usura, still injured near the dais but conscious. "Then reach the matron." "We move the princess to her first, not to my people." Captain Surin stared at him, startled by the choice. Then she nodded hard. "Agreed." The next 30 seconds became noise, heat, and motion. Elias lifted Lyra only when she grabbed his collar first, and even then he kept her turned toward Usura so everyone watching could see where he was taking her. Milo ran beside them with the emergency case banging against his hip, occasionally throwing smoke markers, filter packs, and one very offended-looking stuffed rabbit at problems as they appeared. Captain Surin covered their left. Human security covered their right without crossing into Verathi formation. It was messy, fragile cooperation, built in the middle of a lie. A fake guard lunged from the smoke and caught Elias across the shoulder with a short blade before Surin drove him back. Elias grunted but did not drop Lyra. Warm blood darkened his sleeve. Lyra saw it and went pale. "I hurt you," she whispered. "No," Elias said, moving faster. "He did. Very different. You're bleeding. People do that sometimes." "We'll complain about it later." Milo, panting beside them, said, "I can complain now if that helps." "It does not." Noted. They reached Usura just as another blast shook the hall and collapsed part of the upper projection dome. Elias lowered Lyra beside the matron, then immediately backed half a step away with both hands visible. That small movement changed everything for Usura. He had delivered the child and released her. He had not claimed gratitude. He had not used the princess as a shield. Lyra turned and grabbed his sleeve before he could move farther. "Don't go," she said. Usura looked from the child's hand to Elias' wounded shoulder, then to the false guards regrouping near the northern arch. Her face filled with shame, confusion, and dawning terror. "Princess," she whispered, "why did you run to him?" Lyra's eyes were wide, wet, and fixed on Elias' chest where a faded patch showed a white bird with open wings. Her voice trembled because he said the words from the fire. Elias went still. Usura's expression changed. "What fire?" Lyra touched the patch with two shaking fingers. "The old one." Then the emergency shutters slammed down across the main hall, cutting them off from Queen Marith and trapping Elias, Lyra, Milo, Usura, and a handful of wounded survivors inside the smoke-filled side corridor, with the attackers still searching behind them. The side corridor sealed with a heavy metallic boom that shook dust from the ceiling seams and cut the screams of the main hall into a muffled, distant roar. For one breath, the small group stood frozen under red emergency lights. Elias Morrow listened first, because panic always wanted people to speak before the room had finished telling the truth. The corridor was narrow, lined with silver maintenance panels and decorative treaty carvings that now looked absurd under smoke and alarms. Behind them, somewhere beyond the sealed shutters, Queen Marith was still trapped in the main hall. Ahead, the passage curved toward the Ark's service spine. Between those two directions, the attackers were moving. Elias could hear boots, disciplined and careful, not panicked. That meant the false guards were not improvising. They had planned a secondary route. "Milo," Elias said quietly, "how much air support do we have?" Milo dropped to one knee beside his emergency case and started pulling items out with frantic professionalism. 2 child filters, 3 adult filters, one cracked recycler, 6 heat patches, 4 sugar gels, emergency light rope, vacuum tape, and 1 stuffed rabbit whose morale value remains untested. Usura pressed one hand to the wound at her temple and stared at him. "Why do you carry all this?" Milo looked offended. "Because everyone mocks the quartermaster until the universe becomes a hallway full of treason." Elias took one adult filter and handed it to Usura. "Can you walk?" She pulled herself straighter with visible effort. "I can serve, not what I asked." Her eyes narrowed at the human tone, but pain humbled even royal discipline. "Yes." Slowly, Lyra stood close to Elias, both hands wrapped around the little breathing filter, eyes still fixed on the faded white bird patch sewn to his uniform sleeve. The patch was old, its edges worn, the symbol nearly scratched away by years of armor straps and field repairs. "That bird," she whispered. "It was in the fire." Elias did not answer at once. He felt the words move through him like a door opening in a place he had kept locked for years. There had been many fires, many children, but one memory rose sharper than the rest. A shattered evacuation shuttle near the Ashen Gate. Red light. Toxic smoke. A tiny alien child trapped beneath a collapsed seat frame, too frightened to cry properly, fingers reaching through ash. He had wrapped her in a silver thermal blanket and carried her out while the hull screamed behind him. He had never known her name. "Princess," he said gently, "I have been in a lot of fires." Lyra's eyes filled with tears. "Did you say it before?" Elias looked at her, then nodded once because lying to frightened children was how adults built haunted rooms. "Maybe I did." A hard knock echoed from the sealed shutter behind them. Not random impact. Search pattern. Elias turned instantly and guided Lyra behind a thick service column. Captain Surin, the wounded loyal Verathi guard, raised her sidearm with shaking hands. 2 civilian witnesses crouched near Usura, one bleeding from the arm, the other holding a cracked translator bead to his throat. Milo tossed Elias a small disc. "Motion chime. Stick it somewhere useful." Elias slapped it low against the shutter frame. "Does it explode?" "No." "Why do you sound disappointed?" "Because I packed in hope, not prophecy." Elias almost smiled despite the blood running down his shoulder. Then a voice came through the shutter from the other side, smooth and official. "Princess Lyra, Royal Recovery Unit, open the door." Usura stiffened. "That is not a recovery code." Elias looked at Surin. She shook her head. The voice continued, softer now. "Little star, your mother is waiting." Lyra flinched so hard Elias saw it. The private nickname again. Weaponized tenderness. Elias crouched beside her, lowering his voice beneath the speaker. "Listen to me. People who want to help you do not need secret names to make you obey." Lyra swallowed. "They sound like home. That is why it works." She looked at him with a child's terrible need for truth. "Then where is safe?" Elias pointed down the corridor toward the dim emergency lights. "Right now, forward. One turn at a time." The shutter sparked as a cutting tool bit into the far side. Elias stood. "We move," Surin protested. "The service spine leads away from the queen." "For now," Elias said. "The attackers expect us to claw back toward her. We go around, find a relay, and tell the loyal guards exactly who is wearing fake crests." Usura looked at him. "You could take the princess to the human side from there." Elias met her stare. "I could, I won't." The answer seemed to trouble her more than an argument would have. "Why?" Elias glanced at Lyra. "Because she asked if I was taking her to humans. I said no. If a child trusts you in the middle of a nightmare, you do not spend that trust like currency." The matron looked away, and shame crossed her face so openly it felt indecent to witness. "I taught her to fear your kind." Milo, gathering the case, said more softly than usual. "A lot of people taught a lot of wrong things after the war." Elias did not let the moment settle too long. "Move." They pushed into the service corridor, following the emergency strips as smoke chased them from behind. Elias kept Lyra beside the wall, not in his arms, because she needed to feel her own feet choosing the path. "Every few steps," he said, "small steps, keep breathing." Each time her breathing steadied. Each time Usura heard it and grew paler. At the first junction, Milo cracked open a maintenance panel and connected a translator patch to the emergency relay. "Give me 30 seconds," he said. 20, Elias replied. Cruel but motivating. Surin covered the rear while the shutter behind them finally gave way with a shriek. Boots entered the corridor they had just abandoned. Milo's patch flickered blue. Relay alive. Elias leaned close to the transmitter. "This is Sergeant Elias Morrow with Princess Lyra Vale. She is alive. Repeat, alive. False royal guards have reversed crescent crests and are using private palace language. Do not trust recovery units without oath verification." Static answered first. Then Queen Marith's voice broke through, raw and shaking. "Lyra," the child stepped forward, tears spilling now. "Mother, I'm here." On the other end, the Queen made a sound no ruler would ever make willingly in public, relief breaking through terror. Elias took one step back so everyone could hear he was not controlling her words. Lyra looked at the patch again, then at her mother's voice coming through the relay. "Mother," she whispered, "I think the human from the fire is here." The channel went silent. Then somewhere behind them, the attackers began to run. The attackers began to run because the lie had heard its own name spoken aloud. Elias Morrow knew that kind of sound. He had heard it in collapsing ships, in broken cities, in the silence after a traitor realized one survivor had escaped with the truth still breathing. The boots behind them were no longer searching carefully. They were moving fast now, careless enough to make noise, because Princess Lyra had reached her mother through the relay and said the impossible thing where loyal guards could hear it. "The human from the fire is here." Elias grabbed the translator patch from the panel and pulled Milo back from the exposed junction just as the first shot cracked down the service corridor and punched sparks from the wall beside them. "Move," Elias said. Captain Surin fired twice from cover, forcing the false guards to duck behind the curve. Milo clutched his emergency case to his chest and stumbled after the group. "I would like to submit a formal complaint to whoever designed diplomatic stations without enough coward-friendly exits," he gasped. "Later," Elias said. "You always say later when I am most inspired." Lyra held the breathing filter tight and ran beside Usura, but her eyes kept flicking to Elias' sleeve, to the worn white bird patch that had become a key turning inside a locked part of her memory. They reached a small emergency shelter built into the service spine, a reinforced pocket meant for maintenance crews during pressure failures. Elias shoved the door open, scanned the corners, then motioned everyone inside. Surin entered last, firing one final shot down the corridor before the door sealed. The shelter was barely large enough for them all. Red light pulsed from the ceiling. The air smelled of sealant, dust, and overheated wiring. Outside, the attackers hit the door once, then stopped. Elias raised one finger to his lips. Silence settled, broken only by frightened breathing and the distant thud of the Meridian Ark's alarms. Milo slowly lowered his supply case and whispered, "If they are listening, I hope they are intimidated by my bag." Usura shot him a look. Milo whispered, "Comfort humor. Very advanced human technique." Lyra did not laugh. She was staring at nothing now, her small face gone pale beneath the ceremonial marks. Elias had seen that too, memory shock, not a child inventing a story. A child falling backward into something her body had stored before language could protect it. "Princess," Elias said gently. He lowered himself to sit against the opposite wall, keeping distance between them. "You are safe for this minute. Only this minute matters." Lyra looked at him slowly. "You said that too." Elias went still. "What?" "In the fire. You said only this minute matters." Usura covered her mouth with one hand. Captain Surin's eyes narrowed, not in suspicion now, but in dawning horror. Elias took a slow breath. He remembered Ashen Gate in pieces because that was how the mind carried things too heavy to hold whole. The distress call had come from a Verathi evacuation shuttle drifting, half buried in wreckage near a shattered convoy lane. Human rescue units had been ordered to stay clear because the battle was still active, and both sides were accusing the other of firing first. Elias had gone anyway with 3 other rescue Marines, and a medical cutter that had no business entering a debris field full of live mines. He remembered cutting through a burning hatch. He remembered finding adults already gone. He remembered one small child trapped under a bent seat frame, silent except for the tiny clicking sound she made when she tried to breathe through smoke. He had said the words because there had been no time for better ones. Small steps, keep breathing, I've got you, only this minute matters. Lyra hugged her knees to her chest. There was a silver blanket. Milo had stopped joking now. Elias nodded. Yes, and your arm was bleeding, probably. You carried me. Elias' voice softened until it was almost rough. I carried a child. Lyra looked straight at him. Me. He did not answer immediately, because this was not a battlefield claim or a diplomatic advantage. This was a child asking whether her nightmare had a face. I think so, he said at last. I did not know your name. I didn't know you were royal. You were just small, scared, and alive. Usura's eyes filled. The official record said loyal Varathi recovered her from the wreckage. Elias looked at her, not angry, only tired. Then the official record lied. The words were quiet, but they changed the shelter more than the alarms outside. Usura flinched as if struck. I repeated that record to her for years. Lyra looked at the matron, confused and hurt in a way no wound gel could help. You said humans made the fire. Usura's voice broke. I believed it. Lyra whispered. You said my dreams were shadows. I thought they were. Usura knelt despite the pain in her body and bowed her head before the child she had raised. Little star, I am sorry. Elias looked away to give them privacy, and because his own chest hurt in a way he had not planned for, the shelter's emergency relay crackled suddenly. Milo lunged for it, adjusted the translator patch, and caught fragments of a command channel bleeding through the wall. A male Varathi voice, controlled and cold, said, "The princess must not reach the queen with the human alive. If Morrow is identified, the Ashen Gate record becomes vulnerable. Recover the child. Remove the witnesses." Nobody moved. The voice continued, "Admiral Rayler confirms authority." Captain Surin's face went white with fury. Rayler! Usura stared at the speaker like it had become a grave opening under her feet. Elias closed his eyes for half a second. There it was, the bridge between old fire and new smoke. Milo slowly raised one hand. I know this is not the ideal time to be useful, but I may have recorded that. Everyone turned to him. He tapped a small device clipped inside the lid of his emergency case. Continuous evidence buffer. Quartermaster habit. Also useful for proving people said rude things near supply crates. Elias almost smiled. Almost. Can you preserve it? Milo looked offended again. Sergeant, please. I preserve receipts from lunch. Lyra stood then, small and shaking but no longer hiding behind the filter. My mother has to hear that. Elias shook his head. She will. Now, Lyra said. Her voice trembled but the word held. They used my aunt. They used me. They made me hate the person who saved me. The shelter went silent. Elias saw something change in the child, not innocence lost, but courage taking its first painful shape. Usura reached for her. Princess, it is too dangerous. Lyra looked at Elias instead. You said only this minute matters. Elias nodded slowly. I did. Then this minute I want the truth to move. Outside the shelter door, the false guards began cutting through the lock. Sparks spilled across the threshold. Elias stood, checked his wounded shoulder, then picked up his weapon from Milo's case. His voice was calm again, but beneath it lived something colder. Then we move with it. The lock on the emergency shelter screamed as the false guards cut through from the other side. But Milo Finch was already elbow-deep in the wall panel, muttering at the meridian arc like it had personally insulted his family. Whoever wired this relay had no respect for panic users, he said, pulling a ribbon of glowing cable free and clipping his little evidence recorder into the port. There should be one large button labeled "Tell Everyone the Treason." Elias Morrow stood beside the shelter door with Captain Surin, counting the rhythm of the cutting tool through the metal. The attackers were not rushing now. That worried him more. They knew the group had nowhere easy to go, and they were taking enough time to make sure the door opened on their terms. Princess Lyra stood behind Usura, clutching the silver emergency blanket Milo had wrapped around her shoulders. The blanket should have made her look smaller. Instead, in the red shelter light, it made her look like a child wrapped in the same memory everyone had tried to bury. "Can you send the recording to the Queen?" Elias asked. Milo grimaced. "Send. Maybe. Prove. Not yet. The ARC's relay is locked under diplomatic emergency protocol. It will carry live voice, but evidence packets need authorization from either delegation command or station arbitration." Usura looked up sharply. "The Queen can authorize it." Milo tapped the panel and the damaged relay spat sparks at him. "Fantastic. We just need to reach her while assassins are trying to turn us into legal confusion." Captain Surin stepped closer to the wall panel, her wounded arm pressed tight against her side. "There are old arbitration caches in service stations near the main hall. If we reach one, the ARC can verify the recording without Verathi or human permission." Milo stared at her. "You are telling me there is a neutral truth machine down the hallway and nobody mentioned this sooner?" Surin gave him a flat look. "Most diplomats do not need to authenticate treason while being hunted. That sounds like poor planning." Elias cut in before they could spend their last minute arguing. "Distance," Surin pointed through the wall toward the service spine. "2 corridors, 1 lift shaft, then the rear arbitration alcove behind the ceremony hall." Elias pictured the route. Narrow, bad visibility, probably watched. But better than waiting. "Milo, can you carry the recording?" Milo lifted the device. "With my life, my bag, and several complaints." Elias looked to Usura. "Can Lyra move?" Usura opened her mouth to answer, but Lyra spoke first. "I can." Her voice shook, but she did not look away. "I want my mother to hear him say it." Elias crouched slightly, keeping his weapon pointed at the floor. "Then we do this carefully. We are not charging back into the hall. We get the evidence verified, then we walk in with truth loud enough that both sides hear it." The shelter door blew inward before anyone could answer. Not fully, just enough for a muzzle to appear through the smoking cut line. Surin fired first, a clean shot that knocked the weapon sideways before it discharged. Elias moved in the same second, slamming his shoulder into the broken door and driving it outward. The impact threw the first attacker back into the corridor. He hit the wall hard, helmet cracking against the panel. A second false guard lunged through the smoke with a shock blade raised. Elias caught the wrist, turned with the motion, and drove the attacker into the doorframe with enough force to drop him. He did not stop to finish the fight. He stepped back, covered the corridor, and said, "Move." Surin took point. Usura guided Lyra behind her. Milo came next, one hand gripping the evidence recorder, the other dragging the supply case that refused to die quietly. "I would like everyone to remember I was hired to count blankets," he panted. "This is outside my job description." Lyra, even frightened, whispered, "You are very loud for a hiding person." Milo blinked at her, then nodded solemnly. "Princess, that is the first honest performance review I have ever respected." They pushed into the service spine just as more attackers rounded the far bend. Elias fired 2 stun rounds into the overhead light track. The corridor went dark except for emergency strips, forcing the attacker's helmet optics to flare and recalibrate. Surin used that breath to open the lift shaft access, and the group slipped inside one by one. The shaft smelled of grease and cold metal. Below them, the arbitration alcove level glowed faintly through a maintenance grate. Elias climbed last, listening as the false guards reached the shaft above. A shot screamed down the vertical space and sparked off the ladder near his hand. Lyra gasped. Elias looked down at her. "Small steps," he said. "Keep breathing." She nodded, tears on her face, but kept climbing. Usura watched that, and the shame in her expression deepened into something stronger. Resolve. The arbitration alcove was half buried behind a decorative wall of treaty symbols, untouched by the attack because no one planning violence expected truth to hide in an old filing room. Surin forced the door. Milo dropped to the main console, plugged in the recorder, and began typing with furious little jabs. "Come on, beautiful neutral machine. Make yourself useful." The console pulsed amber. A calm synthetic voice filled the alcove. "Evidence authentication requires source declaration." Milo looked at Elias. Elias looked at Lyra. The child stepped forward before either adult could decide for her. Princess Lyra Vale, royal witness of the future ceremony. The console turned blue. Accepted. Milo fed in the recording. Admiral Rayler's authority, the order to recover the child, the warning that if Morrow was identified, the Ashengate record became vulnerable. Then Surin added her guard verification. Usura added her sworn testimony that the men who took Lyra War reversed royal crests. Finally, Elias uploaded the only file he still carried from Ashengate, a damaged helmet camera fragment from the rescue, one he had never deleted because some ghosts deserved evidence they had existed. The image flickered to life. Smoke, fire, a younger Elias wrapping a tiny Verathi child in a silver blanket. His voice cracked by heat saying, "Small steps, keep breathing, I've got you." Lyra made a small sound and reached for Usura's hand. Usura began to cry silently. The console spoke again. Evidence chain verified. Broadcast available to main hall and arbitration record. Milo looked at Elias. Now, Elias checked the corridor. Footsteps were coming, too many. Not from here. If we broadcast without the princess visible, Rayler calls it fabrication. We walk it into the hall. Lyra wiped her face with the edge of the blanket. "I will speak," Usura whispered. "Little star." Lyra turned to her, small and trembling and suddenly impossible to dismiss. "They made me afraid of the wrong person." Elias felt something twist hard in his chest. He stood, took the verified evidence drive from Milo, and handed it to Lyra instead of keeping it himself. "Then you carry the truth," he said. "I'll carry the trouble." The alcove door shook as the attackers reached it. Elias raised his weapon, Surin raised hers, and Milo lifted his supply case like a shield. "For the record," Milo said, "I preferred diplomacy when it had snacks." Then the door burst open and the truth began moving back toward the hall. The alcove door burst inward, and the first false guard came through behind a slab of smoke and blue shield light. Elias Morrow met him before he could fully step inside, striking the man's weapon aside with the edge of his forearm and driving a stun round into the joint of his armor. Captain Surin fired past Elias' shoulder, dropping the second attacker before he cleared the doorway. Milo Finch made a sound that was half battle cry and half offended accountant, then swung his emergency case into a third attacker's helmet with a heavy metallic crack. "That was for damaging neutral infrastructure," Milo snapped, stumbling backward. Elias glanced at him. "You okay?" Milo looked at the dent in his case and seemed personally wounded. "Emotionally? No. This bag has served with honor." Lyra clutched the verified evidence drive against her chest, the silver blanket still wrapped around her shoulders like a piece of the old rescue made real again. Usura tried to pull her back, but Lyra shook her head. "No," the child whispered. "If I hide again, they keep the story." Elias heard that and felt the entire shape of the mission change. This was no longer only about getting her to safety. It was about getting the truth to breathe in public before men like Rayler strangled it again. They moved fast through the rear service passage toward the ceremony hall. Surin led with a stolen clearance blade. Elias stayed behind Lyra and Usura, keeping himself between the child and the pursuit. Milo followed close, dragging the wounded civilian witness with one arm while still refusing to abandon the supply case with the other. Shots cracked behind them, striking wall panels and sending sparks into the air. Elias returned fire only when he had a clean angle. He would not turn this corridor into a slaughterhouse around a child. At the final bend, the sounds of the main hall returned. Shouting, alarms, broken stone grinding under boots, two armed forces one breath away from blaming each other forever. Elias stopped at the last service door and looked down at Lyra. "Princess, when we step out, everyone will look at you." Lyra's lower lip trembled, but she nodded. "Will they listen?" Elias looked through the narrow viewport. Human security had formed a defensive line on one side. Verathi royal guards held the other. Between them, Queen Marith stood with a blade drawn and grief carved across her face. Near the central dais, Admiral Rayler was speaking to the room like he already owned its fear. Elias said, "Some will, some won't want to. That's why you keep speaking." The service door opened behind the Verathi line. Half a dozen guards swung weapons toward them at once. Elias immediately lowered his rifle and raised his empty hand, letting everyone see Lyra in front of him, walking on her own feet, not carried, not held, not used as cover. The hall went silent in pieces, first the closest guards, then the human side, then the queen. Marith turned and saw her daughter alive, soot-streaked, wrapped in a silver emergency blanket standing beside a wounded human soldier. For a moment, all royal composure vanished. "Lyra," she breathed. Lyra took one step forward, but Rayler's voice cut across the hall before mother and child could reach each other. "Do not approach them, Your Majesty. The human has had time to manipulate her." Elias did not answer. That mattered. If he defended himself first, Rayler would make it about human words. Lyra looked at the Admiral instead. "You called me an asset," she said. The hall tightened. Rayler's expression remained controlled. "Princess, you are frightened. You do not understand what you heard." Lyra's hands shook around the evidence drive. "I understand when someone grabs me. I understand when someone lies with my nickname. I understand that he gave me a choice and your men did not." Queen Marith moved slowly now, eyes locked on the drive in her daughter's hands. "What is that?" Lyra held it out. "The truth machine said it was real." Milo lifted one finger from behind her. "Verified by Meridian Arbitration Cache, chain authenticated, cross-linked with guard testimony, audio capture, and historical rescue footage. Sorry. I panic in technical language." Rayler's face hardened. "This is absurd, human fabrication." Surin stepped forward, wounded but steady. "I verified the reverse crests. I heard your men use false recovery orders. I heard your command authority named." A murmur rippled across the Verathi ranks. Rayler turned on her. "Captain, you are confused by smoke and injury." Then Lyra pressed the drive's activation mark. The broken treaty recorder flickered back to life, not blue now, but white arbitration light. The hall filled with the recorded voice from the corridor. "The princess must not reach the queen with the human alive. If Morrow is identified, the Ashen Gate record becomes vulnerable. Recover the child. Remove the witnesses." Admiral Rayler confirms authority. The room went dead quiet. Rayler opened his mouth, but the next file played before he could speak. A helmet camera image appeared above the shattered dais. Years earlier. Fire. A ruined evacuation shuttle. A younger Elias crawling through smoke. A tiny Verathi child trapped under wreckage. The white bird patch on his sleeve. His voice, younger and strained, saying, "Small steps. Keep breathing. I've got you." Queen Marith staggered as if the image had struck her harder than any weapon. Usura began to weep openly. Lyra turned to her mother and whispered, "He saved me before." Rayler finally broke, not with confession but with command. "Loyal Dominion forces, fire on the humans now." No one moved at first. Then 3 of his officers raised weapons. That was enough. The hall exploded into motion. Elias shoved Lyra toward Marith and stepped into the line of fire as Surin and the loyal royal guards fired back. Human security moved, not against the Verathi but beside them. Milo threw a smoke marker that bounced off a column and burst between Lyra and the gunfire. "That was supposed to be more graceful," he shouted. Elias took a shot across the armor plate and dropped to one knee but kept firing stun rounds until the last of Rayler's loyalists fell back from the dais. Through the smoke, Lyra reached her mother. Marith wrapped both arms around her child and looked over Lyra's shoulder at Elias, not with hatred anymore, but with the terrible expression of a woman realizing her enemy had carried the truth longer than her own court had. Rayler was retreating toward the eastern exit, but the hall had changed. The lie had finally been wounded in public, and this time it could not crawl back into history unseen. Rayler ran because for the first time in his long career, command did not answer him. The eastern exit was less than 20 steps away, half hidden behind smoke and a fallen ceremonial banner, but the hall that had once obeyed his voice now turned against him in pieces. Loyal Verathi guards moved first, not perfectly, not without fear, but with the sudden fury of people who had realized their own grief had been sharpened into someone else's weapon. Human security moved beside them, covering angles instead of taking credit, firing only at Rayler's loyalists who refused to lower their weapons. It was ugly, loud, and brief. Stun fire cracked across the broken treaty floor. Silver armor slammed against black stone. A false guard lunged toward Queen Marith and Lyra, but Captain Surin intercepted him with a shoulder charge that sent them both crashing into a shattered column. Milo Finch, who had somehow found the courage to stand upright again, threw his emergency case at the attacker's knees and shouted, "That bag outranks you morally." The guard fell hard enough to stay down. Elias Morrow pushed himself back to his feet, one hand pressed against the burned edge of his armor where the last shot had hit. His shoulder was still bleeding from the blade wound, and each breath scraped, but his eyes stayed on Rayler. The Admiral had reached the exit now. Two loyal officers covered him, firing wildly toward the center of the hall. Elias raised his rifle, then lowered it when he saw Lyra's face over Marith's shoulder. The child was watching everything. Too much already. Too much violence folded into truth. Elias changed aim and fired at the door control instead. The panel burst in a shower of sparks, and the eastern blast shutter slammed down directly in Rayler's path. The Admiral stopped so suddenly he nearly struck it. When he turned back, Queen Marith was standing. She still held Lyra with one arm, but the Queen's other hand lifted slowly, and every loyal Verathi weapon in the hall followed her command. "Rayler Dask," she said, and there was no scream in her voice, no theatrical rage. That made it worse. "By authority of the throne you claim to protect, you are under arrest for treason, murder, falsification of war record, and attempted abduction of the royal heir." Rayler's face twisted. "You believe human theater over your own admiral." Marith's eyes moved to the floating image still frozen above the shattered dais. Elias carrying a tiny child through fire, the white bird patch bright in the smoke. "No," she said. "I believe my daughter." That broke something in him. Rayler reached for his sidearm, but Surin fired first. The stun round struck his wrist. A second shot from a human guard hit his shoulder. Rayler collapsed to one knee, shaking with rage as loyal guards surrounded him. "Peace will make you weak," he spat. "Humans will devour what grief has left of us." Lyra stepped slightly out of her mother's arms, still trembling but upright. "No," she said, her voice small and clear. "You fed us grief so we would stay hungry." The hall went silent around that sentence. Rayler was taken alive because Queen Marith ordered it. That mattered. The lie had ruled through buried evidence and dead witnesses. It would end in open judgment, with records, testimony, and every surviving faction forced to hear the truth without smoke to hide inside. When the last of his loyalists had been disarmed, the emergency lights softened from red to amber. Medics entered at last from both delegations, working side by side in the wreckage of the ceremony. No one announced peace. No one cheered. The hall was too damaged for easy triumph. People were wounded. Some had died. Trust had not been restored in one brave moment. But the next war had been stopped before it could be born, and sometimes history turned on exactly that much. Queen Marith crossed the broken floor with Lyra beside her. Elias tried to straighten when he saw her coming, then failed slightly because blood loss had opinions. Milo caught his elbow. "Heroic posture later," he muttered. "Circulation first," Elias whispered. "Not now. It is always now with circulation." Marith stopped before the human soldier. For a long moment she said nothing. Her face held too many emotions to arrange into royalty. Grief, shame, relief, and the awful clarity of a mother who had nearly lost her child to a story she herself had helped preserve. "Sergeant Morrow," she said at last. "Years ago my house called you a murderer." Elias did not look away. "Your Majesty, years ago a lot of people were trying to survive bad information. You carried my daughter from fire. I carried a child." Marith's voice trembled once. "She was my child." Elias lowered his head. "I'm glad she lived." That simple answer undid more of the Queen than any accusation could have. She lowered herself to one knee in front of Lyra, not caring who saw. Her crown tilted slightly, no longer perfect. "Little star," she said softly, "I told you not to go near a human because I thought I was protecting you." Lyra looked at Elias, then back at her mother. Am I still supposed to hate them? Marith closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were wet. No, you were supposed to hate a lie. Usura, standing nearby with a bandage at her temple, covered her mouth as the words struck her too. I helped teach it, the matron whispered. Marith looked at her, then at the hall around them. So did a throne, so did a fleet, so did fear. She stood and turned to the surviving witnesses, human and Varathi alike. Let the record show that humanity did not destroy the Ashen Gate convoy. Let the record show that human rescue forces answered our distress call. Let the record show that Sergeant Elias Morrow saved the royal heir while others buried the truth. Her voice strengthened. The treaty will continue, not because the past is healed, but because today we have finally stopped worshipping the wound. Lyra walked to Elias then. No one stopped her this time. She took his hand carefully, mindful of the blood and burns, and looked up at him with the solemn courage of a child who had crossed through smoke twice and found the same hand waiting. Small steps, she asked. Elias' tired face softened. Small steps, he said. Milo sniffed loudly beside them and then pretended he had inhaled smoke. Surin rolled her eyes but smiled anyway. Around them, medics worked, guards stood down, and broken cameras continued recording the first honest moment many of them had ever seen. The royal child had been brought to the summit to prove she could stand before humans without fear. Instead, she became the first Varathi in a generation brave enough to see them clearly.